Hey, we're going to talk about boundaries today. So, actually, we're going to talk about boundaries all week. So, come on in and join us. All right, chickadees, welcome into today's episode. We're starting a brand new week this week, but we're continuing with our theme of listening intently to understand. Now, last week we looked at self-abandonment and self-betrayal quite a bit. This week we're going to focus on boundaries, which, frankly, boundaries are the reason why we end up in self-betrayal and self-abandonment is when we don't have good boundaries in place. So the whole idea this week is we're going to look at how we listen deeply without actually abandoning ourselves. And this is through boundaries. And boundaries are a mechanism to love yourself. They are an act of self-love. Believe it or not, they're also an act of love for the other person. And here's the thing. I was the world's worst person with boundaries until about 4 years ago. And I got hit face to face, or got hit in the face to face. I came face to face, and I got hit in the face with what it means to not have boundaries. And I've talked about it on this channel before, so I won't go and repeat it here. But I essentially embarked on a journey to understand interpersonal boundaries, when they're important, when they should get put in place, when you move the boundary, whether it's out or it's back in a little bit, and just why they exist to begin with. So yeah, they're not mean. Boundaries are not mean. You don't put them in place as a result of anger. You want to not be in anger when you do it. You want to be neutral, emotionally neutral, and understand that it's for the highest and best good of everyone when they get in place. And if it's not, right, if you're still angry, you've still got a lot of things going on, you still may need to put them in place to protect yourself if it's a really significant situation, and you should always do that. And the rest of the time, you may just be looking at how do I, end a pattern. I'll just say an interpersonal pattern that you have going on. And I'll tell you what's interesting is this year, at the end of this year, I decided that I was writing for myself what my list of non-negotiables are for close relationships, friendships and otherwise, so it was like, under what type of relational conditions do people have access to me, and at what level? What am I comfortable with? And this is it's kind of almost like a manifesto for myself. And it's really to help me understand in my life which relationships are, especially as I go forward and make new friendships and have new relationships and all of that, which ones are worth investing my time and energy in, at what level, right? Most of us have a group of close friends. I call those my inner circle friends, right? And I presume that for most of you, those are the friends that get much more access to your time and energy. And then if we have spouses, they get even much more than that, access to time and energy. But then what happens, outside of that? So, you start with the ones that should, I'm going to say, get the most access and energy from you, which is your spouse or partner, and then your inner circle or your close friends, and then your, however you want to tier out your friendships. And yeah, it was a very enlightening exercise, and it left me with a real solid understanding and clarity about what it means for me to have relationships that are meaningful for me and hopefully for the other person as well, and what those look like from an energetic and access standpoint. So it was very, very interesting exercise. I would encourage you to do it and just see how that see how that pans out for you and how that measures up, and then look at it and look at your relationships with that in mind as well. So it's very interesting. It's very enlightening. So all right, without any further ado, let's get into this week's card reading. So again, we're dealing with boundaries this week and how boundaries help us move into a place or remain in a place where we can listen intently and really understand. So let's just see what Spirit has for us. So we're going to pull these cards out of the Oracle of the Seven Energies by Colette Baron Reed, one of the decks that our guides take us to an awful lot, and we've already had 2 cards come out of this deck. So there's the third. Nope, that's not it. This is the third. Okay. All right, so let's see what we have. And we'll look at all 3 of them first. Card 1 was Beyond the Ordinary. Card 2 is Tender Embrace. And card 3 is Body and Soul. So let's look at these one at a time. Card 1 is number 45. That's a 9, and it's Beyond the Ordinary. And what is coming through to me is this card is kind of prompting the recollection of being asked to put boundaries in place and then not doing it. And maybe some of you out there have been asked to put a boundary in place or have had that thought. That thought is your intuition, by the way. I learned from experience, so I made the mistake, so you don't have to. But it's about putting that boundary in place and knowing, hearing the warning to do it, the ask to do it, and then not doing it. And what Beyond the Ordinary specifically is helping us remember is that when we are asked to do things like that, or when our higher selves are trying to protect us, or Spirit's trying to protect us, we have a tendency to question it. I do. I have a tendency to question it. And especially when it's something that I don't know the why to. Right? It's really easy when you know the why, or I will say it's easier. It's not really easy, but it's easier when you know the why. But when you don't know the why, it's beyond your understanding. It maybe seemingly doesn't make any sense at the moment, and you're being asked to do this thing. Spirit's nudging you to take this action. Let me just tell you the story. So. This was a while back. I had like a couple years ago, I had a reading with a psychic medium who told me in the reading she was asking questions about my spouse. Now, because I'm in a same-sex marriage, oftentimes when I get these readings, they will voice it as if it's my husband, right? And so sometimes I will correct them and sometimes I don't. It just depends on the situation. And in this case, I did not correct this individual at the moment. And they went from talking about my marriage to talking about a friendship, a close friendship. So for me, when she was changing, the person I was having the reading with, she was changing her pronouns from, the masculine to then asking me about literally asked, who's the female? And I was like, well, I said, that's my wife. I said I had a wife, not a husband. And she said, oh, well, she's toxic. Like literally said she was toxic. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, it kind of threw me a little bit. So we have to be really careful with these readings, because it threw me, because here I thought this medium was telling me that my spouse was toxic, and I was like, that does not ring. It doesn't make sense. I have a beautiful marriage. That is not what's going on. And it threw me for a loop because I was not very well trained in how these things can come out at the time. So I fast forward a few months after that reading, and I did nothing about it. Thank goodness I did nothing about it. I fast forwarded a few months from that reading and realized that reading was not referring to my spouse at all. It was referring to another friendship in my life. And yes, indeed, that individual at that time was toxic, and that relationship needed to change course immediately. And had I been able to ascertain that at the moment, I would have put a boundary in place, or maybe I wouldn't. And that's the thing that's been interesting to think about, because I don't know if I would have. Because at the time, this was why I didn't see what was happening, because at the time, I wasn't willing to see that friendship for what it was. And again, this is a while back. And so I wasn't ready to take the action that I was clearly being told by my higher self, by the spirit, by spirit to do. And in fact, I just kind of got angry about it because I knew it wasn't. I just knew that they were wrong, that the psychic medium was wrong, right? And in fact, looking back on it, that particular psychic medium was dead on, 100% correct. So, but we have to be careful about these things, especially if you're in a situation where you're having a conversation with a psychic and the pronouns change and you're not tracking it. Get clear. They will help clear you up. So get clear on that. But had I known at that time what that psychic medium was really telling me, and had I put a boundary in place like I really needed to, I would have been saved, some of the kind of consternation and frustration and, and questioning and confusion, a ton of confusion, if I had just put the boundary in place. So that's card 45, and that's beyond the ordinary. So the second card we have is card 22, and this is Tender Embrace. And this one and card 3 are kind of related in some ways, because this card is telling us to really love ourselves, right? That loving others and loving ourselves is important. And we put our oxygen mask on first. We love ourselves even more than, especially if you're someone who has a tendency to overgive. You want to make sure that you're loving yourself at least, if not more, probably should be more, than you're loving anyone else. We don't want to be doormats, and we don't want to overgive to the point where our reserves and our energy becomes depleted. So if you're somebody like me who's an empath, a very sensitive person, and always wants to give more than they receive, you got to be careful with this one and make sure that you're balanced, you're getting the self-care that you need, and that you are really taking care of yourself. So this card and also the next card, so we'll just kind of move into the last card, card 3, which is card number 5. This is Body and Soul, and this card is telling us that when these things happen, when you have to put a boundary in place, it is not easy to do. I remember the first time I had to put a very significant boundary in place, I was just gut-wrenched over it. And this was years and years ago. I literally was gut-wrenched over. I was nauseated. I had a headache for probably a week. It ate me up because I felt like I was failing that relationship. I felt like I was not doing right by that other person. But I knew I had no choice. it was a matter of my own self-respect, and it was a matter of my own self not to betray or, or to, allow myself to be taken advantage of at a level that was incredibly significant in my life at that time. And this was decades ago. So I recall when I did that, I was not in a place where I understood that I needed to take extreme self-care. And that is what Body and Soul is telling us. Extreme self-care is called for. Boundaries aren't easy to put in place. And some of you are probably making some decisions about, do I go into like a no contact boundary with someone? Do I pull that boundary back? Because boundaries will be moved out from time to time, and then they will recede from time to time, just depending on the nature of the relationship and how things evolve, because our relationships do change over time. And so, you're probably, if you haven't been through this, hopefully you don't have to go through this, but there are times when those boundaries have to be reassessed for whatever reason. Sometimes they can be softened or pulled back, and then at some point something may happen where you put them back in place. Anytime I put a boundary in place, it's an act of love. It's an act of love for yourself first and for the other person as well, right? Because you're putting a boundary in place because there's a mismatch, whether it's a mismatch in, the way that we maneuver in the world, or a mismatch energetically or emotionally, or whatever the case may be, relationally. So they're not put in place lightly. So, and you don't want to put them in place when you're wrapped up in the emotion of it, if you can avoid it. There are some boundaries in some situations where that boundary needs to be put in place immediately to protect yourself physically, emotionally, and mentally from harm. And those go in place right away, and no questions asked, and do not negotiate it with yourself. So, but what will happen, and this is why Body and Soul is really important, as well as tender embrace, this self-care and really loving yourself, putting your oxygen mask on first. It's so important, because when you put that boundary in place, especially if it's one you don't want to put in place, which is usually the case, you may have some gremlins, and especially if you're an empath like me, so you may have some emotions that pop up. Maybe it's guilt, a deep sense of guilt, or doubt may creep in about, why that boundary was necessary. Was it really that bad? Or was it, don't you love them more than that? Can't you just get along? Whatever the case may be, whatever voice is coming up in your head, that's why this is important, is so that you can really continue to take care of yourself. And the other thing that may happen, and this has happened to me in the past, is I realized that I just got a lot of time back. So, because maybe it was somebody you were investing a lot of time and energy in, and in a relationship you were investing a lot in, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, now what? So look for the things, that can, if you have that time, keep yourself occupied. Not occupied so that you're not feeling through it, but occupied so that you don't have enough time to do something that you might regret. So, which might be, whatever the case may be, whatever your hobbies are, you might want to kick them up a notch or something. So, for me, it's pretty much been hobbies, or just kind of maybe introducing a new level of commitment to something, or, whatever the case may be. Maybe I go to the gym more, maybe I, whatever. So whatever you need to do to make sure that, number one, you're not bypassing how you feel, right? You acknowledge that you've got some emotions going on. You're taking care of yourself, right? And you are loving yourself first. And that you are reminding yourself that the boundary is in place because it's good for you and it's good for the other person. It is not something you do because you're mad. A lot of people do, but that's not what we do here. We're not putting boundaries in place just because we're angry or somebody pissed us off. We're putting a boundary in place because it is the healthiest thing to do. And it's for the highest and best good of all involved, ourselves first. Okay, putting our oxygen mask on first, then we'll help others. So, all right, chickadees, that's it for today. Today's episode, as we dive into this topic of boundaries and how they actually help us, and how that you'll see later in the week how they set us up to be able to listen more intently to understand. So, all right, chickadees, have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time. Mwah.